those in which companies develop and apply new technologies in there is a message. Okay. In which companies develop and apply new technologies to existing businesses or create new services using digital capabilities. The impact of digital technologies is felt across the economy, including in traditional sectors such as agriculture, construction, and utilities. They directly or indirectly influence each and every sphere of business in the modern economy and have become indispensable part of our daily lives. The nature of the market is such that only a few players become successful. That is the winner takes it all situation. Digital markets are highly concentrated markets and are often controlled by a mighty few. Digitalization and online platforms provide numerous benefits to firms and consumers, including increased choice and economic opportunity, but they can also raise market concentration and competition concerns. Features of many digital platforms, multi-sidedness, zero pricing, use of data, network effects, and competition for rather than in the market have led competition authorities to rethink traditional tools. In doing so, they have taken diverse views of the consumer welfare standard and the ability of digital markets to self-correct. As a consequence, international differences have emerged, adding to various trade tensions. In this brief background, I would like to again extend a warm welcome to Mr. Ezrachi, who has taken time out for us today. A brief introduction about Mr. Ezrachi, who actually needs no introduction. Mr. Ariel Ezrachi is the Slaughter and May Professor of Competition Law and a Fellow of Pembroke College, Oxford. He serves as the Director of the University of Oxford Centre for Competition Law and Policy. He is co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Antitrust Enforcement, OUP, and the author, co-author, editor, and co-editor of numerous books, including Competition Overdose 2020 HarperCollins, Virtual Competition, The Promise and Perils of the Algorithm-Driven Economy, 2016 Harvard, The European Union Competition Law, An Analytical Guide to the Leading Cases, 6th edition, 2018 Hart, Global Antitrust Compliance Handbook, 2014 OUP, Research Handbook on International Competition Law, 2012, Intellectual Property and Competition Law, New Frontiers, 2011 OUP, Criminalizing Cartels, Critical Studies of an International Regulatory Movement, 2011 Hart, Article 82 EC Reflections on its Recent Evolution, 2009 Hart, and Private Label Brands and Competition Policy, 2009 OUP. His recently published papers focus on the digital economy, e-commerce, parity clauses, marketplace bans, vertical agreements, buyer power, and the limits of competition law. They include the award-winning papers, Sponge and Artificial Intelligence and Collusion, and the BEUC consultation papers on EU competition law and digital economy. He is also the co-author of the report on digital platforms, Stigler Center, Chicago University, Booth School of Business. His work on algorithmic collusion has been central to policy discussions in international organizations and competition agencies, including, amongst others, the CMA, OECD, UN, House of Lords, etc. He is part of a research project on competition law and economic inequality funded by the Leverhulme Trust, pardon my pronunciation. Professor Ezrachi develops training and capacity building programs in competition law and policy for the private and public sectors, including training programs for European judges endorsed and subsidized by the European Commission. He's an academic advisor to the European Consumer Organization, BEUC, member of the Independent Committee on Digital Platforms, member of UNCTAD Research Partnership Platform, and a former non-governmental advisor to the ICN. Like I said, we are honored to have you with us, sir. I'm sure that we will learn a lot from you. I will quickly inform our participants along with welcoming more participants. When I started speaking, we had around 59. We have now around 113 participants and more are joining. We welcome you all again, and we will be hearing Mr. Ezrachi speak. I request you all to please park your questions for the end of his talk. And if you have any observations, you're welcome to write or type in the chat box. Once he finishes talking, we'll leave the house open for observations and comments and questions, wherein you can also speak. So I request you to please park your questions in the end and to make a healthy, a lively session towards the end of the session. With this, over to you, Mr. Ezrachi. We are really looking forward to listening from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Can we have the slides just uploaded, please? That's lovely. So hi, everyone. Good to join you. Now, I was told that we have a bit of a mixed group, some with a lot of experience when it comes to competition law, some with slightly less. So I'll try to pitch it somewhere in the middle, but mostly to try and give all of us a nice introduction and overview of what's so special about the digital economy. And it's a big question because for the past decade or so, there are many people that argue that there is nothing special about the digital economy, and therefore we should just, keep calm and carry on. And the counter argument is that there are some things that do merit our attention. So let us begin. I'll try to be relatively brief, so we have some time for questions and comments at the end. Sorry. So, let me, in terms of controlling the slides, okay, I now see how I control them. That's great. So I think it's incredibly important for us to start our discussion first by highlighting all the benefits that we get from the digital economy. So the rest of our talk will obviously, because of the nature of competition law and our concerns, will focus on the things that are a bit more negative. But it is very important, of course, to start by appreciating all the goodness that we get. There are services that we would never had ability to access before the digital revolution. Our interaction, our discussion is such an example of how amazing is this. And this will not be possible without the innovation, the economies of scale, the network effects that actually created this amazing digital environment that we all use daily. However, there are some things about the digital economy, digital markets, that do merit our attention, because in many ways, this is not business as usual. The digital economy displays certain tendencies that are so unique. Now, each and every one of them might not necessarily be new. But the important thing for you to remember is that we have this aggregated effect where now we are coping with quite a lot of these elements. So the first thing is network effects. And network effects have always been there. Of course, think about direct network effects. The more people use the telephone network, the better the telephone network is for all of us. And indirect network effects, relationships between advertisers on the yellow pages and those who read the yellow pages. So these type of things. But now when we escalate that into the digital environment, network effects become incredibly important, not least as they tend to tip markets, some markets in favor of the incumbent. Now, network effects on their own are important, but what is also important is the role of data in our digital economy. Data became a critical input in the digital economy. Some people refer to it as oil. Some people acknowledge that, of course, it is slightly different. We can reuse data again and again and again if what you want to do is share it with more people. And yet the access to data, to a timely data, to the right velocity of data is still something that is limited to only a handful of super platforms that can very much make use of it. Now, data without the analysis is relatively useless. So it is, in addition to the big data, we speak about the big analytics. And this is the ability to deploy algorithms that can identify certain patterns in the data. They can learn things by looking at vast levels of information, highly detailed, and can deduct certain conclusions that can be useful for us, either for marketing, for understanding the market, etc. The best example that you have from your daily business would be when you search something. If what you're searching, if you're using Google, Bing, or any other search engine, whatever you're searching provides more data. When you search for Apple, are you searching for Apple computers? Are you searching for the fruit? What is it that you're looking for? And the more data runs through the system, the more the algorithms can understand how, based on other indicators, they can predict what it is that you want. And this is something that we came to view as almost natural. This is part of our environment. But pay attention how behind the scene, everything works together to deliver the products that we have. Now, one thing, I mentioned the search, that is a characteristics of our system is the asymmetry of information and analytical power. You go online and you try to search for something, and for you, this is a single interaction. However, on the other side, you have algorithms that gather more and more information. They can gather information about you. They can gather information about those who are in certain relation to you through emails, through text, through social media. So there is a massive asymmetry of power. It is relevant to us because in competition, we tend to assume that the market is organic. We have this vision of an organic market as you walk on the high street and there are shops and retail and everything is just there, and the market, the invisible hand of competition, determines what is best for you. What we have here is such a level of asymmetry of information that many times, and we'll mention that again later, many times what you see has been designed for you, and sometimes with the interest of extracting more value from you rather than benefiting you. And as we heard at the introduction, those markets tend to tip in favor of someone, and what we have are gatekeepers. So we have key interfaces that we all use. Often we use them because we consider them to be superior or because they have certain branding that we value. The important thing is that in the environment that we have a relatively more sustained market power. Not only do we have relatively concentrated markets, the market power there is more resilient, it's more sustained. Stealth, tracking, harvesting, something that we all are familiar with. Another interesting feature, zero pricing, the fact that many of the services that we receive are free. And then there is a question, there used to be a question whether there is a market if everything is free, but there is another question of, is it really free? And whether free is zero or it is just another indication of us paying using something else, for instance, data. So with all of that, what we have is an environment that, although it seems very competitive at times, it is actually rather different. The dynamics of competition online differ from the dynamics that we were used to in brick and mortar. And the best indication or to understand it is when you look at the platform economy. The platform economy undoubtedly created a massive shift. Now, again, platforms are extremely useful. They create new business, they allow access, they create efficiencies. But if you look at this table of the 8 largest companies in the world by market value, 7 out of these 8 are platforms. That's quite remarkable. So the economy has shifted quite significantly toward the platform economy. Platforms not only are beneficial, but they were able to absorb much of the value that go through them. What am I saying by that? In a competitive market, you would expect each player to make certain markups. But what we have is a market where there is a lot of value that is retained in these ecosystems. And these are elements that started to give rise to concern earlier on. I would say even going back 10 years, you had initial observations that something isn't right. This is not the competition we were hoping for. And you have a lot of food pushback. And as we move on and we understand more about the digital economy, there is an increasing consensus that something isn't right. So where do we stand with the policy debate? The first question is there a problem? So if I take you back, let's say 8 years or maybe 9 years, when you said to someone, there is a problem, you're a platform, let's take Google as an example, you're a platform and you control where we go, then the answer would be there is no problem, competition is a click away. That question today is less relevant because I think there is an increasing consensus that there is a problem. There is another question, is that a competition problem? Is this a problem that competition laws should address? Is it a problem for regulation? Is it a problem for a different area of law? Is it something that the state should intervene? Is this something that the market can correct or not? Then there is a subsequent question. If this is a problem for competition law, what exactly is competition law about? And those here in our meeting who have background in competition know that although we like to present competition as a very solid discipline, in reality, competition is a bit fluid in the sense that what competition law, I see someone is adding some beautiful illustrations to the slides. In a way, competition law is can be adjusted based on the national legislation, but also on the way that you engage with the competition law, the way that you design your systems. And different countries, different jurisdictions have different ideas about how wide or narrow the competition regime should be. And then subsequently, the question is, if there is a problem with competition law and it cannot really deal with what we have, should we amend the law? Should we change the way that competition law is applied? What is the right enforcement approach? And in addition to that, what is the role of regulation? Because if competition law cannot address that, should we deal with regulation? So this is where we stand at the moment in terms of the public debate. There are, last year, I think there were more than 40 core reports. I mean, there were plenty more, but in terms of reports that you would actually go and read because they had very important things to say about the economy, about platforms, about collusion. So there is a lot of discussion in international organizations, at universities, competition agencies. It's a very lively debate. And what I want to do is to run with you together through some of the possible anti-competitive activities. And the reason that you see a question mark here is because for every story that I will tell you, just so you will know, there will be a group that will say there is nothing anti-competitive about this. There is nothing to fix. And if it's not broken, there's no need to fix it. So this just shows you what kind of a challenging debate we have, where you can use certain theories of harm that are to some extent more relevant to brick and mortar and argue, if I cannot quantify what you see, then there's no problem. And this is what makes it such a challenging and also a really thought-provoking debate. So let us start with market power, because I think all of us naturally gravitate toward market power when we think about large platforms. So to give you some examples, I already mentioned briefly Google search. This is an interesting case because it took ages. So it's a case that can be used to question whether competition law is truly effective. It is a case that was handled differently in the US and the EU. EU started a case first trying to get commitments, trying to resolve it through some sort of consent decree with Google. The US looked at it and said, no problem. So already there you see difference in approach, difference in our assumption that the market will correct itself, lead us to take completely different enforcement steps where we look at the problem. What was the accusation? Google runs the search page. Google had its own downstream operation that was Google Shopping. It had different names at the time, but it's the Google Shopping. That service was not performing very well. There were other aggregators, other services that were doing much better. So on the organic search, you would come across other providers before you will hit the Google search. Google looks at that and says that does not make any sense. How can we improve the positioning of our Google Shopping? Let us pull it up and put it above the organic search. If this is at the top of organic search, then what this will do is will ensure that we get traffic. The complaint is that when you do that, you divert traffic from other websites that might be better than your website. You basically get the income, the advertisement income, the clicks, and the potential sale. Google argues there's no problem there. Google says competition is a click away. If you like something better, just go to the next page and click away. The issue here, and what the Commission is highlighting in the decision, is that while the competitor may be a click away, competition isn't. So that's a bit of a nuanced argument. It is true that all of you can today take your mobile, throw it in the bin, and get another mobile from another provider, because that mobile will have greater and better privacy settings or something. Most of you, in fact, I would dare to say none of you will do that. It is true that when you search something, you could go to page 9 and find something there. In reality, none of you would. And this brings us to behavioral economics, to human behavior. The way we react is that whatever is in front of us, we click on that. The way we react, by the way, in a supermarket is very similar. This is why there is always tension as to who gets which shelf when you have large supermarkets. So self-favoritism became a theory of harm. Now, the case is on appeal. So Google applied for annulment of the Commission decision. We're still awaiting the judgment of the General Court, but it is very interesting. It is about competition law, taking a theory of harm that we knew as refusal to supply, and we had some cases of self-favoritism, and creating a whole new section where in the digital economy, we look at behavior, we look at your reaction to clicks, we look at traffic, and we try to show whether there is self-favorism that basically enabled you to get an advantage, not because you're better, but because you're affiliated to the upstream platform. So the same logic moves on. We now have an Amazon investigation looking at the possibility, and this is an ongoing investigation, what Amazon does with the information they have about other sellers in the Amazon marketplace. The fact that they can harvest information, the fact that if they see a certain segment that is profitable, they can cannibalize that segment. Should they be allowed to do so or not? We have something similar with Apple and Spotify. And here it is similar, it's slightly different. Apple basically taxes Spotify and has very strict rules that do not apply to Apple Music, to its own services. And again, that's the story there. So this was a string of cases that are market power and self-favoritism. There is another interesting case, which is about market power and privacy. And it is interesting because it links back to what we said a few minutes ago about this challenging us to consider what exactly competition law is about. This is a case from the Bundeskartellamt, the German competition agency. And what the Bundeskartellamt has done is criticize Facebook for basically forcing you, when you join the service, to allow it to join information from WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook together. So Facebook does give you an option, join or not. But if you join, they want to be able to merge all the information. This is something that the German competition agency objected to. Why is this such an important case? Because that case tries to stretch our concept of what competition law is about and say, it's not just about pricing, it's not just about quality. I'm using privacy as a parameter of competition, and I will apply the law when what you do is downgrade privacy. Now, the case was run using very specific German legislation that says that if you infringe a certain right, here is a right that derives from the GDPR in Europe, then this can amount to an abuse of a dominant position. In other words, the Bundeskartellamt did not show actual harm by trying to quantify and look at what happens. it used a certain assumption using German case law. This was criticized by the Düsseldorf court. So when the German competition agency reached at the decision, it gave an order to Facebook to stop merging the data and the information. There was no fine involved. Facebook appealed the order. The interim measure that was basically then quashed by the court. We are still awaiting now the actual appeal on the main case. But you get a certain indication from the court. The court first criticized the competition agency for taking this shortcut. But this is less of interest to us. But what is interesting is that the court really found it slightly hard to grasp what it means in the digital world not to be allowed to join Facebook. The court said, well, Facebook didn't try to mislead you, and therefore we don't understand what the abuse is. Now, the argument is it has nothing to do with misleading. It is about my outside options, my ability to choose other services. Then the court said, but so many other people don't use Facebook. How can that be essential? And yet the other argument would be, well, for many people, arguably billions around the world, if you don't allow them access to a social network, you give them a choice between being closed in a dark room for the rest of their life or integrating. So they will say yes, regardless of what you want. There are behavioral arguments of whether we are able to quantify elements of privacy or not. So this is kind of a hot potato. This is a case that we're all waiting to see what will happen with it and what might be the impact that it has on the scope of competition law as we move into digitalized markets. Let's move to another story, again with market power. And this is about the creation of ecosystems. In a traditional competition story, even the largest company, you would say, yes, but they still face competition in the market. Maybe you will say there is competition for the market. Now take a slightly different view and consider how this looks when you consider the platform as an ecosystem. So what you have is platforms that not only won the competition, they are able to run a competitive process within the platform. We basically have private competition ventures that take place internally within each and every one of those platforms. And this is extremely interesting because our assumption has always been that competition is organic and it takes place on the market. And yet, if you're an advertiser, if you're an app developer, if you are providing input, you run and you behave and you engage in commerce in a platform that applies its own rules. And those rules determine the level of competition, the intensity of competition, and by the way, also the level of tax, how much you will be taxed when you win the business or when you advertise. And when you look at the ecosystems, and this is something that Maurice and I recently explored in our new book, Competition Overdose, you see that there is an ecosystem that was designed to do certain things. First, the ecosystem is designed to hook us, the users. So if you use Facebook, Facebook has engineers and behavioral scientists that think, how can we retain that individual for longer on our network? Because the more engagement, the longer the engagement, the more the value that we get, both in terms of extracting data, but in terms of money. So we have a whole new industry of serving you with news that is irritating, very controversial. The whole fake news, the whole stories, the conspiracy theories, they, of course, are powered by interested parties, but also by a lot of commercial interests, because all of us apparently react extremely well when we are annoyed. In fact, when we are pleased, we just close our eyes and think about something positive. When we're annoyed, we react. We send back a message. Someone sent back a message. This creates excellent engagement. If you have kids and they play online, maybe you're familiar with reward ads. Your kid is playing, your kid lost. Your kid is told, hey, don't worry, you can continue playing. Just watch these 2 ads. They watch the ad and they continue. The whole system is created to create massive engagement. That enables the platform to then extract our data. That's a big story through cookies, through third-party tracking, direct tracking. And the interesting thing is that that data is then being sold on the other side of the market. And that side, if you look at it, might look extremely competitive because you have multiple bids, one after the other. And yet, when you consider what happens during those bids, you see that the winner is almost always the platform. So there are some experiments where you put £1 at the top when you want to advertise, and the question is how much of it actually gets to the website that display the advertisement. And some estimates say as low as 40p. So 60% disappear. If we go back to the story of the platform, disappear within the platform because of the way that competition was designed. So this is interesting because it gives us a very interesting indication of where we're heading to private arenas of competition, where competition is designed by someone. And when you design competition, quite rightly so, by the way, you will design it to favor yourself. So there is a comment here that is in place. The ecosystems, the platform, they're not villains. If you own a business, you will do whatever you can to maximize profit. The problem is not with them. The problem, if anything, is with society. If society is unhappy with so much money going to very few, or with all the privacy disappearing somewhere, well, it is for society to enact laws or for competition agencies to engage in enforcement. But one thing should be clear, even if ethically you are unhappy with some of these things that I just described now in the ecosystem, there's nothing illegal about it. And this is why it is such an interesting policy debate, because it is for us at this moment in time to think, is this the way that we want to go? Are we happy to go back into basically private avenues of competition where someone else, not the state, decides the tax and decides what happens and decides who gets to compete and can exclude or push out others if they do not serve the interest of the platform? Okay, part of the story that I told is, of course, about data harvesting. I think it merits just one more comment. Data harvesting is so crucial to the story of digitalization that if you are a disruptor, if you're an innovator that decides that you wish now to disrupt the ability to harvest, you have no future. And that's important. There are some stories. I mean, one story that we discuss in virtual competition is the flashlight application and disconnect. I won't go into that. Maybe if later someone has a question, I can explain more about this. But the interesting thing to understand in these controlled ecosystems, if you're a disruptor and you're trying to serve a different interest, because you operate in a private property, you can be excluded. Maybe it will be designed in a way that the exclusion does not feel as if it was meant in order for you to just not be able to challenge the existing technology. But the reality is that disruptors have a very difficult time. And that is relevant to our discussion because it opens another dimension of what is the impact of this story on innovation. It is not only about the competition that we see, it is also about type and level of innovation that you will see in these ecosystems. And again, there is a lot of innovation taking place. We're very fortunate in this digital environment. But what type of innovation? If you're a maverick, you better be a very special type of maverick in order for you to be able to survive in that environment. Okay, let's move to another story. That is the story of behavioral discrimination. So just to what we discussed so far was around the theme of market power. I'm now moving, it's still relevant, of course, to market power, but I want to show a different type of a competitive problem, or maybe you would think that it's not a competitive problem. And this is about behavioral discrimination. I don't know how many of you remember the movie The Truman Show. Truman lived in a bubble, basically, and he thought that this is life, and he was unaware of his whole universe being controlled. And in many ways, when you go online, so often we forget what we're actually doing, and we have the sense that the shops that we see online are the shops that are on the high street, and that we have this freedom. In reality, when you walk with a sense of autonomy on the path online, in reality, you walk with a sense of autonomy on a path that I designed for you. What do I mean by that? Because I can extract so much data about you, because I can analyze it, what we have is increasingly an ability for the seller to identify your reservation price, your willingness to pay. So, and you can play that game sometime at home when you go online and see what happens when you use different methods when you go shopping. So, for instance, if you decide to shop for something and the algorithm determines that you have limited outside options, you are likely to get the market price rather than a discounted price. So, if let's take an example. You come to my website directly because you're a loyal customer, I will often reward you with a higher price. Whereas if you came to me and my algorithm determined that you came through Google, I understand that you're aware of outside options, I will reward you with a discount. If you leave something in a basket and you leave, the algorithm detects that you may not be completely happy with the price that was quoted. Maybe the algorithm was mistaken and your reservation price is actually different. If that's the case, pay attention how many times you get a pop-up window and says, hey, come back, here's a discount. Try to see what happens when you're looking for a specific holiday or flight in a given date. The price will go up. Open a different computer with a different IP address, you will often get a lower price. Try to see what happens as you stay with a single reservation. Sometimes we have drip pricing. The prices change while you were in the process. Go out, open another. So what you see is that the idea of a market with a competitive price is being replaced with a reality of a discriminatory price. So this is discriminatory pricing, but also it is about behavioral discrimination. And just to give you an idea of the power of the algorithms, when you send an email, when you send a text on social media, when you have an entry, algorithms now can analyze your mood. Are you anxious? Do you feel silly? Do you feel stressed? Do you have any issues? Based on that, the algorithms will serve you with advertisement that can be relevant to you. So we are much more vulnerable than most of us really are aware of. Now, some companies will be very open about this. Some will not. Some companies paid quite a high price when it was exposed. Amazon twice engaged in personalized pricing. Twice it was exposed. They apologized. They said they will not do it again. Many other companies have, they will not promote it, but they have less of an issue. Any third-party provider of dynamic personalized pricing will give you all these services. You don't have to develop them in-house. This is available online, and it's a viable way of trying to make more money. Again, we're coming back to the question that we started with: is this a competition problem? If you are looking at it from a pure economic perspective, you would say, well, actually, discrimination can be good. And of course, it can be good, because discrimination enables us to use, for example, an infrastructure more often to make more money out of an infrastructure. But is this the type of discrimination that neoclassical economic analysis dealt with, or are we talking about something different? This is absolute ability for perfect discrimination. That's quite different. This is the ability to extract all the value. If you imagine the demand and supply curve, this is exactly the consumer surplus, this triangle that is extracted from each and every one. Is that something that we should allow? Is competition law the right tool to address this? Some competition agencies have elements of fairness in them, EU being one of them. Some competition agencies have no regard to distribution of wealth. So they care much more on whether the pie gets larger. Regardless of how they term it, in reality, they care much less on someone being able to extract all the value from you. So this is, again, it shows you how technology is moving extremely fast, and there is this background question of how do we cope? Do we intervene? Should we use competition law? Maybe we should use consumer protection law. What is the right way of doing it? And if you look at things that most of you probably already start using in your homes, you realize how the future will look like. In the future, with voice recognition, you will engage with a single provider. You will tell your digital butler, please order me a taxi, please order me this and that. They will basically then either run an auction or just provide you from their vertically integrated corporation with the service they want. Much less choice, much less control. In a way, because we value the comfort, many of us are willing to source out the shopping to a single provider, and we are willing to move out of the market. So what really happens is, if you use one of them, you agreed with your provider that you trust them, and you say, I don't need to shop around, you just give me whatever you want. Now, if this is a conscious decision, that's perfect. Many times I will also buy something knowing that it might be slightly more expensive. There is a certain comfort there. You buy it from your usual provider. But if this is done in a market where you only have 2 or 3 key gatekeepers, it has a massive impact upstream. And the question is, are you aware of what is happening? And another question is, should we allow this to take place if the result is a distortion of the competitive market? The last area that I want to discuss with you is that of digital collusion. So we spend time on platforms and market power, on discrimination, and the last story will be collusion, the use of algorithms to, for example, facilitate price increases. And this can happen in various ways. I'll be relatively brief, but try to give you a nice image of when it is controversial and when it is less so. First thing is in a vertical relationship, a resale price maintenance. This is about a producer telling its distributor, you will sell at a given price, and making sure that all the other distributors will sell at the same price. Although this happens in a vertical relationship, what you have here is a horizontal collusion. Basically, the distributors all sell at the same price, and this reduces intra-brand competition. When the product is a relatively dominant product, this has massive implications to consumer welfare. This is why in Europe, for instance, resale price maintenance is considered a violation that has the object of restricting competition. In some jurisdictions, it will be analyzed under the effects-based analysis. Why is that relevant to us? Because as more markets move into an algorithmic environment, what we have is quite interesting. We have an ability to police the instructions from the producer to the distributor using algorithms. We can automate the process. Prices are online. All I need to do is design an algorithm that will police this. And this is important because it prevents the opportunity for arbitrage. If I wanted to cheat on the instruction and give you a discount, in brick and mortar environment, it might be months before anyone will know that I'm actually selling below the determined price. But in an online environment, because of the transparency, if you automate that, it becomes much more stable. So we have an interesting case in the UK that dealt with Casio. We have a year earlier, we had quite an interesting case in the EU. All of them are traditional resale price maintenance cases. The uniqueness is that it was powered or supplemented by using algorithms to police the agreement. The next thing is when we go just to horizontal collusion, cartel, typical cartel. We will meet somewhere, we will agree the price, we'll try to minimize communications. But for the cartel to be successful, I will need to send people to monitor your price, you will do the same. And the idea is that I cannot trust you because you might undercut the cartel price. Again, here, if you introduced algorithms, you can reduce the need for us to communicate, and you can police the agreement. So if you sell online and I sell online, that means that we have a transparent price. All I need to do is to put in place an algorithm that will visit your website every now and then and make sure that the price is the same as agreed. If you drop the price, I can automate my algorithm that my price will be dropped immediately. That's the punishment. Now, if you know that I have that automated system and I know that you have that automated system, there is no cheating anymore. We just remove the incentive to cheat and we stabilize the cartel. And we have some cases, again, where you had a traditional cartel where humans agreed to fix the price, but they implemented it using more advanced systems, using algorithms. The third story of collusion is one of hub and spoke. So this is about, I mean, this has a whole area in competition law where you see hub and spoke, where instead of having horizontal communications, I will communicate with someone upstream and he or she will pass my message to another person that competes with me. Why is that interesting for algorithm and digital environment? Because a lot of the companies that operate on those markets do not have the facilities and the capacity to engage in big analytics. So what you do is you outsource. You ask a company to provide you with digitalized management of your stock and with dynamic pricing. And the issue here is that you might find that there is an incidental hub and spoke. Although I never intended, possibly, to fix the price with my competitor, because I'm using a certain company to determine my price, because they have the algorithm that deals with dynamic pricing and they can see what happens on the market. If another company uses them as well, then the server that we're supposed to determine the price based on what happens on the market now controls 2 players, and then 3 players and 4 players. I'll give you an example from Rotterdam. One company called A2I provided dynamic pricing for petrol stations. That meant that the price at the pump will be determined by the length of the queues in other petrol stations, the time of the day, the level of demand, the level of supply. So first petrol station uses A2I to improve pricing. That's dynamic pricing. That's great. The second petrol station uses them. A third petrol station hears about it, start using them. At the end, all of the petrol stations in Rotterdam use a single algorithm, a single system to determine the price. Once you have that, the market now sits in a single server. So whereas with the first company, there was always the uncertainty, the market was looking out, the algorithm was looking out at changes on the market. Here, what you had is the opposite. The algorithm controls all prices. And this is quite a nice illustration of possible hub and spoke. The possibility that although it might not have been intentional, if everyone is using the same provider for pricing, then pricing is unlikely to be as competitive. And in fact, if you look at many of those providers, they promise you that if you use them, they will lower the chance of a price war. So on their website, the promise is use us, the chance of a price war will be lowered. Very briefly, the last story that is interesting for us is the possibility to use algorithms to create tacit collusion. I won't go into that because we're relatively short on time, but it's a fascinating story. It is the possibility for algorithms to predict how other algorithms will behave under certain market conditions and create stability, which is legal. So when we have markets where we have a little bit of stability and one competitor follows the other, sometimes if that is not the result of collusion, we accept that. There is a whole area where we consider whether algorithms can do that. There is a lively debate on how likely it is. Recently, some economists from Italy proved the concept. So they show that even if you take artificial intelligence and you throw the algorithms into a market without telling them anything, they will learn to charge you at a higher price because there is transparency, interdependence, and an ability to punish. And what you see on the graph in front of you is what happened when in the experiment, basically the algorithm was forced to lower the price. They took agent one of the algorithm, and they forced it back into the competitive price. And what happened is that algorithm 2 immediately reacted by lowering its price, and the two algorithms went back to charge a higher price. So the orange line that you see at the bottom, this is the competitive price. The price that you see in the middle that they align to, this is the tacitly collusive price. And this is quite fascinating. This is not an attempt to try and reach that outcome. This is just to show you, in a world where you use Q-learning for pricing, algorithms are smart and they have an ability to stabilize the market above competitive levels. Okay, so where does it leave us? Final reflections. I hope that what you got from our discussion is how different the digital environment is. There are many more levers that can be controlled by humans that then deploy algorithms. So how competitive is the online environment? Sometimes it is extremely competitive, but many times it is not. The invisible hand doesn't really hold in the online environment. You should think of it more as the digitalized hand. Now, what do we do with it? Now, this is the big question. There is a massive cost when you over-intervene and when you under-intervene. Just like medicine, if you over-prescribe the competition medicine, the competition law medicine, you can chill the market. If you under-prescribe it, the market might be ruined. So this is the challenge. The challenge is to identify the adequate level of intervention, and the challenge is to do so in a way which is effective, and that's not easy. It's not easy to identify when to intervene. It is not easy because it requires you new theories of harm, and it is not easy because remedies that you deploy hardly can bring back the market to where it was. You might be able to force a company to stop a certain behavior, but the damage to the market is very hard to deal with, which again give rise to questions of, should we deal with it using competition? Should we supplement competition with better regulatory tools? What is the cost of regulatory tools? What is the cost of government error? And last comment maybe, we focused really solely on the market for goods and services. Just think of it, there is also a market for ideas. So the discussion that we have is just as relevant to the market of ideas, the type of news stories, the type of news that you get, the discussion that you get, your eco bubbles, your whatever you get in terms of advertisers and lobbyists and interested parties. So the concern is not only for our markets, there is a wider story here. As we move more and more towards an online environment, who controls that environment and what exactly happens there? I'll end with that. I'll be happy to take some comments and try to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ezrachi, for your very, very insightful talk. I think our participants have hugely benefited. We have with us Mr. Dhanendra Kumar, who is the ex-chairperson of the Competition Commission of India. And I think he has a question to ask or an observation. Yes, sir. Please, over to you, Mr. Kumar. And then I'll take up the other questions.
Thank you, Professor. It was a most interesting exposition you made, and I would be very interested, if possible, to have a copy of your slides in due course, which Professor Abha Yadav is always kind to assist. My question right now was that we dealt with a very contemporary issue. What do you think is the role of data and big data in the whole situation, particularly in M&A? More often than not, it has been noticed that the big players, the big sharks, try to buy out small ones, or there are a number of M&A in the market, and more often than not, they have an eye on the data it is going to bring. And as you pointed out in your presentation, usually what happens that there is sometimes data harvesting or use of that data in some other purpose, and sometimes combination of various data brings out a new application. So my question to you is that in this situation that we are discussing, how do you view the role of data, and what can be done by the competition law authorities to factor that in assessing the impact on the market because of that? Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. It's an excellent question. Thank you so much. I think it would be fair to say, and I'm not the only one saying that there is a sense that we possibly, when I say we, I mean competition agencies, underestimated the value of data. So whereas in all merger decisions that you will see in Europe and elsewhere, there will always be a chapter on data. Data here, data there. The real value of data has always been underestimated. A good example is the debate that you had post Facebook merger, when Facebook took over WhatsApp. And in hindsight, you had comments even from people in the Commission, the European Commission, who said, yeah, now we realize that maybe we weren't fully appreciative of the power of data. And of course, there was the whole story at Facebook that they provided incorrect information on their ability to merge data from WhatsApp to Facebook. But even though they were fined on that incorrect information, this in itself did not give rise to change in the decision itself. So if you look at the reports, the report from the group, the Furman report in the UK, the report from the EU, the report from Stigler, well, to be honest, almost all the reports, all of them say data should play a greater role. We should appreciate that data is the new currency. Data is not just about having more data. More data enables you to train the algorithm. Sometimes having the data is mostly about not allowing someone else to have the data. So there are so many aspects of data and competition. But it is challenging because in the context of mergers and acquisitions, we have an ex-ante analysis. It is a forward-looking analysis where we try to predict the outcome. And it is sometimes hard to distinguish between a killer acquisition and a greenhouse that will enable the new technology to flourish. The dividing line between the two is not clear. So I would say, to conclude, certainly increase awareness of all competition agencies that data should play a greater role. That awareness in itself did not give us yet a clear benchmark for assessment of what exactly do you do with it. It's still very much a case-by-case analysis. There is a long list of merger cases in Europe that, in hindsight, when you analyze them, you certainly see that there is a failure to appreciate what Maurice Stuckey termed as duopolies, as dataopolies. So companies that are in possession of this vast array of data.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Professor Ezrachi. I think Mr. M.M. Sharma, if you'd like to introduce yourself and ask the question, please. Mr. Sharma? Yes, please. You can use your microphone, or else, Mr. Sharma, can you hear me?
I can hear. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Am I audible and visible both?
You're only audible. If you want to switch on your video. Please ask your question, Mr. Sharma.
Yeah, we're fine. So, Professor Ezrachi, I'm a great fan of yours, as I said.
I think there is a problem with the
network.
Yes, we can't actually.
Ms.
Bhavna Gulati. Acha.
So, Professor Ezrachi, my first I'll make a comment and then I'll have a question to you. So my comment is, in fact, I was privileged enough to attend this BRICS conference on digital economy we recently had in Moscow. as one of the NGAs. So in that, the conclusion which comes out was that there is a different thinking in the way the digital economy giants are behaving. They understand that consumer welfare is at the bedrock of the competition law universally. Whether it is the post-Chicago school or what the school of thought in Europe prevails, consumer welfare is at the bottom of antitrust. That being the case, the internet, the digital economy giants are not criticizing anybody. Now they have realized very well that if they keep the consumer happy, whether it's by next click to, as you said very rightly, or by giving plenty of choice, or maybe by even sensing their moods through the AI intervention, as you very rightly explained. So that being the case, and the second fact, we should also consider that the digital giants, and I'm now referring to the social media giants, whether it is Facebook or Twitter or what you have, they control not only the market but the minds in which the governments move. So in India, for example, the how popular you are as a leader is seen from the Twitter following you have got, right? And it is across the world with how many Twitter's followers does millions the Trump has and how many Modi has. So this being the case, they have become over powerful. I think this has gone beyond. In fact, I was reading a book called Circle by Deve Poddar. It's an American book, and that's what the dystopia they try to present. And this is the situation. Perhaps are we moving into that situation? So that is the situation we are in. So the point is that the digital giants, they understand the mood. They understand the antitrust authorities will not intervene till they keep the consumer happy. So that being the case, and it has come out very well in your presentation. So the question is this: has the time come for the authorities, of the antitrust authorities, to think beyond consumer welfare? I mean, I'm going back to the Americans, which they keep on shouting that we should go to the effective structure, effective competition structure, and things like that. And in that context, there are a few suggestions which I would like to make, which of course I've read from the literature. So should there be a presumption of predation for dominant platforms because of the sway they have on the data? And then secondly, the vertical integration by cross-leveraging data to gain access to competitors' business operation, should it not be considered as a predatory behavior? These are just examples of predation I'm giving. And thirdly and lastly, sir, you have posed a question whether it is a competition issue or it is a regulation issue. So what, in your opinion, should the government actually start intervening now? Because till now the governments are leaving it to the antitrust authorities. But considering what I said, that they are controlling the minds of people, not only the markets, has the time come for the governments to really intervene regulatory by using their regulatory powers? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions. I'll try to be brief. So I'll pick a few things, because obviously we can spend 2 hours just on these issues. What I would say is that you mentioned their ability to control the mind, to control the government. That would be true both for competition enforcement and for regulation, by the way. If you look at the history of politics, we have regulatory capture and intellectual capture. That has always been the case. There's nothing unique about it. Money has an influence on politics. I don't think anyone who joins this meeting will be completely overwhelmed by this statement. The only difference is that it is a bit more visible now, and there is a real disconnect between what we as a society think is the right thing to do and what some governments seem to promote. So you mentioned post-Chicago. There is a separate debate that we can have on how lobbying and commercial interest led to the Chicago school being elevated, the idea of laissez-faire, and how it still determines a lot of the enforcement actions in the US. It is only in the last year that we have seen a real step taken by the US authorities, a serious one, to look at the digital economy. When we published Virtual Competition, we were the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice to present it to them. And the reaction there, to say that it was different from the reaction in Brussels from the European Commission will be an understatement. And that, in a way, for me, really indicated how different our ground assumptions are. If your assumption is that market will always self-correct, just keep calm and move on, and if your assumption is that you're less concerned with the distribution of wealth in society or power in society, then maybe really there's no need. But I think what happened is that with time, that assumption drove antitrust into irrelevance in some jurisdictions. It basically, if you say that nothing is a problem, then who needs the regime? So this is what led at some point to a certain awakening that leads to more intervention. Should we think beyond consumer welfare? That's the debate on the scope of competition law. This is work that I've done with Beuk here in Europe, and many others have engaged. What exactly is European competition law about? You can have the same debate in India, and that debate, you have to remember, what competition law is about is determined based on the foundations, the social foundations, the political foundations, because they are the foundations that led to the enactment of the law. So for someone to come from another jurisdiction and tell you, you got it wrong, it is for them to pretend as if what they are talking about is some sort of a mathematical equation. Competition law is not a mathematical equation, it's a social policy. So one's decision not to enforce is not a pure decision. It is a decision not to enforce. Just as one decision to enforce is not a pure decision, it is a decision to enforce. In other words, we really, especially us as competition lawyers and scholars, we love the idea that we are advocating a very clear benchmark for intervention. I'm sorry to say that we're not. If anyone is interested in that, have a look at, because it's a big debate, have a look at a paper called Sponge. Competition law is like a sponge. The only question is, which sponge do you want to go with? It's available freely online. Have a look. But I'll stop with that because, I mean, you asked some very good questions, but quite wide in terms of scope.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ezrachi. And I hope Mr. Sharma's questions are answered. We are short of... Yes,
can you please share
surely.
the with me? Thank you.
Surely, sir, we'll share it. And Ms. Bhavna Gulati, who's with the CCI, the Competition Commission of India, has a related question to ask, sir. Over to you, Bhavna. I could read out your question, or you could, I think you should ask. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abha, and thank you so much, Professor, for such an insightful session. My question is kind of related. So whenever we talk about competition between platforms, whether it is the e-marketplaces or it is the online cab aggregators or the online travel agents, we generally measure competition from the consumer, the buyer side of the market, and we think that, you know, if the prices which the buyer is getting is very competitive, then we think that there is no consumer harm as such. But in a two-sided market or in a multi-sided market, we have other consumers. So for example, the seller side of the market is also a consumer in some sense. And when they list their products on a platform, they also kind of expect that there will be fair listing of their products, the ranking would be fair, all those things. So how do we take care of their concerns when the competing platforms, so even if we have competition between platforms, that competition does not really translate to provide benefit to such sellers? Firstly, because those platforms are not competing for the seller side of the market, because the sellers are getting same terms, same conditions, same conduct from all the marketplaces, which means that these marketplaces are not competing for the seller side of the market. And second is that maybe for the seller, they really do not have an option to list their products on platform A or B, because to have a wider coverage of their product to reach to every eyeball, they might want to list their products on every platform. So for them, the choice cannot be really between platform 1 and 2. They might be, you know, wanting to be present on both the platforms. So in that case, can we take one platform, as you said that, you know, it can be an ecosystem. So can we take one platform as a market in itself, or do we still have a wider market definition? Because in that case, none of the platforms would be dominant, and, you know, the market power gets diminished the moment we expand the market. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would say that you really identified the key issue when it comes to the actual enforcement, and that goes to what exactly is the market. And sometimes when we have the mega platforms, it's easier for us because there is obvious dominance. and of course we have some of the key players where it's clear. At other times it's not as obvious. And then the question is whether you can, if you adopt the concept of ecosystem, what we refer to in competition overdose as the game makers, if you look at someone as a game maker, can you change the focal point and say, I'm now looking at all those who are locked in? And here, I would personally say that if you have a market where I am able to capture a significant distribution channel for my input providers, in other words, they cannot exist without me. A loss of my distribution channel would mean a loss of their livelihood. Then I exert market power upstream. I have buyer power in that respect, in the sense that I am able to force on them conditions that are not competitive. I may be able to discriminate, while outside that ecosystem, I might face competitive pressures from others. There might be competition in the market, or there might be competition for the market. But within the ecosystem, I'm able to exert on them because of my data, my analytics, my position of power, and mostly because I'm the channel that connects them to the consumers, I'm able to engage in certain abuse. So very much so, we don't have examples of cases that take that view, but I think we're approaching a position where it will become obvious that you are able to exert market power. And if that's the case, then you should be also challenged on whether you abuse that market power. And that means that our understanding of markets changes. I'll give you the extreme example. If in the future you will use a single interface, and that interface will determine what you buy, what is the information that you receive, and will control you, as long as you do not have outside options, because they have so much background about you, because you're locked in, you could argue in the future that they have market power over you. There will be a market of one. So if you go with the rationale of being able to discriminate and narrow the market and basically create dependency, then we might see smaller markets in that respect. But we don't have time. But there is, of course, an analytical challenge here, because you are completely shifting the analysis. You'll have to show that when I downgrade my relationship upstream, I'm not risking you taking your business elsewhere. And you will show that by showing that I occupy a significant enough channel of distribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ujjwal Kumar from CUTS has a question, if you'd like to ask. Mr. Kumar? His question was, he had also typed it out. Are there algorithms available with regulators to deal with algorithm-led competition concerns? In other words, can algorithm regulate algorithms? He was very eager to ask. Unfortunately, there's a connection issue, I think.
So some competition agencies have started investing in their digital capacity. So we have digital units, hiring many more computer scientists. So yes, to some extent, you can have algorithms that take the monitoring function. Many competition agencies will have a monitoring group that will monitor change on the market, will look for different signs of irregularity. So these elements can, of course, be automated when the market is online. You do have that. You have agencies that have the capacity, for example, to take an algorithm and then put it in a sandbox in the agency's premises, basically, and see how the algorithm behaves. You have dawn raids where agencies capture the algorithms. So there is an increased capacity to do so. Saying that, there are some questions here that move beyond your ability to detect, because there is a question of legality. Some of the things that we can do with algorithms are legal, As humans, we would not be able to achieve those outcomes, but because of the power of algorithm, we are able to achieve them. The law still refers to humans. So even if you were to find that algorithms were able to coordinate action, as long as there was no communication between them, that's legal. So the challenge is twofold. One is indeed with the capacity, and I think increasingly competition agencies are aware of that. The other one is, again, going back to a decision. Let us say that you identify something. What do you do about it? If it's price fixing, it's obvious. If it is resale price maintenance, it's obvious. But once you move to incidental hub and spoke, to tacit collusion, to AI, it's a new dimension.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. There are many, many more questions. I'll take up one from Shubhang, who is saying that from a perspective of remedies or compliance with competition law, what suggestions would you recommend in relation to the design of algorithms? That is it possible to imbibe competition law compliance within the algorithms? I think this is primarily what was asked earlier. And in addition to Ms. Bhavna Gulati's point, it must be noted that in India, there is no concept of collective dominance, which makes it difficult to enforce the antitrust law in case of oligopolies.
Okay, so in terms of a competition by design, absolutely, and this will take us to ex ante measures, to the possibility of having a code of conduct, of having certain things that designers should comply with. The ex post version of that would be that you would say, hey, let me audit your algorithm. And that is impractical if you think about the vast number of algorithms that are operating out there. So competition by design is certainly something that we should encourage. But like anything else in our toolbox, it has its own limitations. But certainly, this is something that is on the table. Yes, the issue of collective dominance, I'm aware of it. But just to highlight, when we speak about an oligopoly, so outside the story of mergers, the story of tacit collusion is a story that also in Europe will be legal. That is the challenge. So if I react to a price increase that you instigated, and I do so without communication, both of us increase the price, the parallel behavior is not illegal. Not in Europe, not in the US, and not in India. As long as there's no evidence of us colluding, that will be legal. The question for our discussion on algorithm is, when that parallel behavior was made possible because of algorithms, should it be legal? So the position in that respect for oligopolies will be the same all over the world. We do not condemn parallel behavior, which is a natural reaction to market characteristics. The question is, if I cannot align my price with you because the market is too complicated, but my algorithm can, is that still something that should be legal? In other words, if generally speaking, 4 companies can engage in collective tacit collusion, in conscious parallelism, which is legal, but in a market with 7, it will never happen. If once we put the algorithms in place, they can do so in a market for 7, should it still be something that we consider to be legal?
Thank you, sir. I think that is the answer we were looking for. And I think we just have time for a couple of more questions. There's one very interesting question that has come from a leading law firm. When platforms promote their own products, for example, promoting the Google Play Store on Google Android as an app store, how strong is the defense of increased efficiencies when indeed that is the case? And I think this is a question that bothers, and we would like this to be answered, please. Thank you, sir.
It is a strong argument, and it's an argument that you will find in all the cases, because that's the most obvious argument for any change. So in any case, when you have seen antitrust intervention around the world, the counter argument has been, what we've done is nothing to do with self-favoritism or exclusion or distorting competition. We improved the service. So when Google introduced its own map with restaurants, it basically then took the Yelp provided that service. It took the Yelp line and put it below the map. Yelp objected and said, hey, now, whereas previously people could click on your link, or on my link, and most people clicked on Yelp link. Now, because you put the map embedded in your search results, I'm being pushed away. Google reacted by saying, I don't understand what you want. I improved the service. Customers now have to click one less. If they want you, you're visible there, they can click on you. So that is the tension there is always present. And this is what makes it challenging. Because what happened, of course, is when Yelp was downgraded, let's say, then you would use the Google map, even though at the time it had less entries. Whereas today, of course, Google dominates that segment because most of us, myself included, will probably click on the map that you see on the front page. How to deal with that? That's exactly the core question. At what point are efficiencies sufficient in order for you to justify certain distortion on the marketplace? And who gets to benefits from those efficiencies? And how exactly do you quantify them? And I think that is a story that you can identify. There is a narrative that grows through all the competition cases that we have in the digital market.
Thank you so much, sir. And I think the questions are pouring in, and I'm afraid we have very little time. I'd like to read out a very interesting observation by Mr. Dirajan, and I'm sorry for the pronunciation, from Financial Services Commission, Mauritius. He says that as online consumers or users, I think we are responsible for what is happening on all of these major platforms. However, if we take time by reading the small prints and checking what competitors are offering, we will then be in control rather than those big tech companies. So I leave you with that thought. And Suyash, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, my question is pertaining to free-to-play games that are now prevalent nowadays. Now, since they don't have an upfront cost, they monetize using microtransactions. It has been noted that this particular way of financing has had an effect to the smaller indie game industry. So can we call this as predatory pricing, or do we need better strategies to regulate free-to-play games?
Okay. So let me make comments on these two things. One, on the earlier comment, we are responsible to take time. Anyone here that has a mobile phone, has applications on your mobile phone, if you were to read all the little print, you will never have any application. Most of us just click accept, 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 which raises a question: whose responsibility is it? Well, because of biases and because of the way that we behave, it is relatively easy to manipulate us. And then the issue is, should the state protect us? There are many examples where we ask the state to protect us because it's very easy to engage in behavioral manipulation and use our biases against us. So it is true that we're all responsible, but what do you do when it becomes obvious that whereas something might have been written somewhere, it was hidden on page 46 of the terms and conditions, and I don't have the capacity to analyze it? So this is, again, it's a question of the relationship between markets and state, and to what extent the state should take steps to protect its consumers. And I accept and agree that different people have very different views of what is the role of government in our lives. But I think generally government should serve us, and markets should also serve us. So if those things don't happen, something needs to be done. In terms of microtransactions, it's a bit of a technical story, because the question of predation is a difficult one. Because what you'll have to assess then in those circumstances are what are the real costs associated with those transactions, and arguably the cost would be very small. So to run an analysis and dealing with these type of transactions as predatory might be rather challenging. It's a bit technical. If you want, we can exchange maybe emails and we can look at it in more detail. But running something as predation is not always easy. Beyond the issue of market power, either looking at the whole market or within this ecosystem, what you'll have to do is really to assess costs. And because in digital markets, what you have are costs that tends to be per transaction minimal, then the question is what benchmark is the adequate benchmark for the analysis? And that can be quite controversial. You might reach a possibility that if you ignore the initial investment, almost any charge will be above cost.
Thank you so much, sir, for patiently answering the questions. I think there is a flurry of questions, and I will have to apologize that all questions cannot be answered because of paucity of time. I'd like to, one last question, sir, I think we're all tempted to ask, is from Akshay Nanda at Try Legal, another leading law firm in India. He asks, what are your views on Google's argument in the Google shopping case before the general court that it is essentially a case of refusal to supply and not preferential self-treatment? Over to you, sir.
So there is a reason. There is a reason behind that argument. Refusal to supply is an area that was developed in quite a structured manner. So for a refusal to supply to be abusive, you have to show that the input is essential. You have to show that you eliminated all competition. So there is a list, a checklist that you will need to satisfy. So what the Commission tried to do is to say, this is not a sub-segment of refusal to supply. This is a different theory of harm, of self-preferencing, similar to cases that you have with ports, when the port favor its own ferry operation over another ferry operation, but still allows access to all the other ferry operations because it makes port revenues from all of them together. So the Commission was keen to detach it, because by detaching the story, you are able to excuse yourself from the need to show the conditions that we have in McGill, Oscar Bronner, IMS, Microsoft, all those cases. Google naturally would rather see that as a case that fits there, because then you have something, an easier target, because then what you will say, look, we did not undermine access, we did not, so it will make it a much easier case for Google to ask. So this is the argument. I think if you introduce behavioral analysis and you look at the way we behave and you look at what happens to those sites, there's no doubt that they were harmed. There's no doubt that competition was distorted. So if you start from the end and you say, if there is harm, should I intervene? Well, it looks like there was harm, but let's wait and see what the court determines on that point.
Thank you, Professor Ezrachi, and a heartfelt thank you to you for answering all of these questions and for the wonderful presentation that you have. You've really led a very insightful talking to this very, very relevant topic of the day. I'd like to extend my thanks to also all the participants who've been patient with us, who've made this session what it is today, and the team at School of Competition Law, without whom this would not have been possible. And again, thank you so much for, we're really, all of us are fans of yours. We've read your books and we keep track of your work. Being in the field of competition law and hearing from you is really an honor. And we hope that this collaboration between the School of Competition Law at IICA and yourself will continue in future. Thank you so much, sir. We will all have, thank you, sir. At IICA, with sir's permission, we'll share his slides, his presentation with all of you, whoever requires. And again, thank you all and have a good day. Thank you.
Good day.